Oberyn Martell blinked, trying to force his eyes to focus on the wavering torches above him. The world spun, lurching at impossible angles. Every breath stung as if his ribs had been replaced with jagged shards of glass. The roar of the crowd echoed in his ears, broken by the shriek of frantic voices. Dust and blood caked his lips. He wasn't even sure if it was his own blood. From somewhere far off, a voice boomed his name. Then, closer, someone shouted that the mountain was dying. He had done that, hadn't he? He had struck Gregor Clegane a mortal blow, or so his memory insisted. But he also remembered the mountain's massive hand on his ankle, twisting him off balance, the monstrous brute looming as the world grayed out. For a moment, Oberyn had been so certain that was the end. Instead, here he was, chest heaving, warm fluid trickling across his face, and yet still alive. The stone floor beneath him was slick with gore. He managed to roll onto his side, a groan escaping him. Above, a ring of faces peered down. Sunlight glimmered behind their heads like cheap halos. A hush lingered in the open air. This was the result of the trial by combat. Tyrion Lannister standing somewhere in the stands, Cersei with her hands pressed to her mouth in shock or horror, Prince Oberyn Martell on his back, the bloodied body of Gregor Clegane not far away. Tyrion would be executed if Oberyn had failed, but the Red Viper of Dorne never let a single stroke go to waste. He had inflicted the fatal wound on the mountain. The real question was whether Oberyn had managed to survive the last savage blow. Judging by his broken limb, battered torso agony, he guessed he had survived just enough. He tried to breathe through the pain and felt the air catch in his throat. His eyes slid to the side. Gregor Clegane lay with his chest open, a dark, wide gash. The mountain's breathing was shallow, hissing, but the big man wasn't rising to finish him. Oberyn spat out a mouthful of blood, tasting victory alongside the iron tang. But it was victory balanced on a razor's edge. He barely heard the desperate cries of the maesters and guards rushing into the arena. Then all went black. He dreamed of Valeria's voice, soft and full of worry. He felt the warmth of her hand on his cheek, but when he forced his eyes open, all he saw was the starched white of a maester's robe. The voice belonged to a tall, stooping man fussing with a damp cloth. Another shape emerged from the swirl. Doran? No, Oberyn squinted and recognized the short brown hair, the black and gold attire. Tyrion Lannister stood at the foot of the bed. "You owe me a life," Oberyn rasped, his throat raw. "I saved yours, Lannister. You may ask for it any time," Tyrion said, quiet, stoic. "Though I suspect at this point you already have it. Gregor Clegane died or is near enough to it, and you won the trial by combat. I am a free man, thanks to you." Oberyn tried to laugh, but the sound turned into a ragged cough. The maester pressed the cloth to Oberyn's cracked lips. The taste was bitter, laced with medicines. "I recall a moment. I was certain my head would burst under that monster's grip. Then, nothing. It was close," Tyrion said. He took a step forward, his voice low to avoid the ears of any watchers in the hall. "After the mountain's last blow, you both collapsed. The entire court erupted. Lord Tywin insisted that the outcome was uncertain until it was plain Gregor wouldn't stand again. It took a heated argument, and then Prince Doran's arrival, to ensure the rules of the trial were properly upheld. In truth, you saved us both. You made it so that my father had no immediate recourse. The sentence he wanted to pronounce was stolen from his lips." Oberyn licked the bitterness from his mouth, searching Tyrion's face. "Your father is a snake that would put me to shame. He will not easily accept this." Tyrion's mouth twisted, not a smile exactly, but a look of resigned understanding. "Indeed, I suspect I'd have been quietly killed on some pretext had the entire stadium not been watching. But for the moment, there's too much scrutiny. The realm saw the mountain fall. That means you won. I was innocent, and my father, our dear Lord Tywin, cannot override the gods' verdict. The alliance with Dorne is tenuous as it is. Father can't risk the outrage of declaring your victory invalid. So I live," Oberyn whispered, closing his eyes. "And you live. And as soon as I stand, I aim to have Tywin Lannister before me, to answer for the murder of my sister and her children. In the eyes of the entire realm, the maester cleared his throat delicately. My prince, you are gravely injured. There is the question of the poison you used on your spear. It seems the mountain's blood reached your open wounds. The results of that mixture could be dire, but we are doing what we can. Oberyn's eyelids fluttered. A pang of fear nipped at him. He had prepared the spear with a special venom that took a brutal toll on flesh, but he had never intended to bathe in that same poison. I see, he said softly, forcing calm. If you can keep me alive, do so. I'll pay you in gold or gratitude, whichever sweetens the pot more. The maester inclined his head. We are employing every remedy we know. Tyrion tapped an idle finger on the bed frame. You've many reasons to live, my prince, he said. At the very least, so we can see Tywin Lannister pay for his crimes. Oberyn's lip curled. Yes, and for that I would endure any torment. In the days that followed, he drifted in and out of feverish dreams, haunted by the sound of Elia's scream. He saw her face again, how she smiled when she first came to Dorne, how she used to tease him as a boy, how she gushed with happiness at the birth of her children, how that happiness turned to terror in the last hours of her life. Pain radiated through Oberyn's body whenever he tried to sit upright. He cursed and spat, demanded his strength return, but was forced to wait for the potions, for the dressings, for nature's slow remedy. Meanwhile, Tyrion visited daily, sometimes reading aloud from an old book or simply pacing the length of the chamber. The imp had nearly lost his life in that farcical trial. Each day, Oberyn noticed how Tyrion's face remained lined with anger, how the bitterness in his voice only deepened. My father wanted me dead, Tyrion would say quietly. He's wanted that since the day I was born. And now, Oberyn would reply, you will see to it he never has such satisfaction. The days turned into weeks, and Oberyn's strength trickled back. He still wore bandages around his ribs and arms, and one side of his face had a scar that flared pink and raw. On a hot afternoon that found them alone in the sunlight of the keep's small courtyard, Oberyn leaned on a crutch and eyed Tyrion. I heard you found Shay murdered, Oberyn said, letting the last word thrum with meaning. Tyrion's expression turned hollow. I loved her in my own way, and she testified against me at the trial. But I never wanted her dead. Father arranged for her betrayal. She was frightened, manipulated, I'm sure. When I was first arrested, I heard rumors that she was, he swallowed, sleeping in my father's bed. Oberyn's brow lifted. You believe that? Varys claims it's true. I can't bring myself to question it too closely. But it was enough for my father to keep her within reach, enough to coax her testimony. And it ended with her death. Tyrion scowled at the memory. Father wields Lannister power for one reason, to bend or break all who stand in his way. Oberyn took a breath, focusing on the golden warmth of the sun. He broke the laws of gods and men when he ordered the mountain to kill my sister and her children. I have known that for years, but suspicion and truth are leagues apart. Even if he is the root of all that is rotten in the Red Keep, you need more than rumor and suspicion to topple Tywin Lannister. Which is why I intend to gather proof, Tyrion said. If you would help me, we might find a way to lay bare his crimes. The dappled shadows of the courtyard made Oberyn's face appear half-masked by darkness. He gave a smile like a dangerous predator. You saved me from the mountain's final blow by shouting for the guards. You gave me precious seconds to regain my wits. I owe you for that, even if I'd never admit it too openly. And I will help you if it leads to justice for Elia. Agreed, Tyrion said. He looked around warily. But we must be cautious. My father has ears everywhere. Oberyn's lips twitched. The spider as well, Varys, is known to have eyes and ears in the most hidden corners. But rumor says he wants stability for the realm. A Lannister civil war is likely not high on his list. We'll see which way he scuttles. Tyrion did not speak for a moment, and Oberyn saw the wheels turning behind that mismatched gaze. Tyrion Lannister was cunning. He was also hated by his family. That made him the perfect ally for one like Oberyn. So began the careful dance. While Oberyn convalesced, Tyrion visited discreetly each morning, trading whispers, speculations, and half-plans. Oberyn shared what he knew from the last years, the suspicious movements of Tywin's men, how Gregor Clegane had so often carried out the unspeakable. Tyrion provided knowledge of the Red Keep's hidden passages, the small council's daily routines, and the labyrinth of corruption that Tywin nurtured. The first small victory arrived unexpectedly. One evening, Oberyn was strong enough to walk the corridors without a crutch. He found himself in a quiet gallery overlooking the city, the dying light painting King's Landing in shades of pink and gold. Tyrion was already there, pacing behind a stone column. With him was a robed figure, face shadowed. It took only a glance for Oberyn to suspect who it might be. Varys. "My prince," Varys greeted softly. "It's a pleasure to see you upright." "Strange bedfellows you two make," Oberyn said, not bothering to hide his suspicion. Tyrion's lips curled in a thin smirk. "The Master of Whisperers approached me this time, truth be told. He thinks we might share interests." Varys gave a genteel bow. "It behooves me, good princes, good lords, to see the realm in better hands. Or at least, to see it not devoured by the hungry lions. And you, Prince Oberyn, have shown a willingness to stand for justice. I too admire that, though I often keep that admiration very private." Oberyn narrowed his eyes. "Justice is a dangerous word in King's Landing." "It can be," Varys agreed, "but it might also keep innocent people from further harm. If you'll indulge me, I have a tidbit of information." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "There is a letter penned years ago in Tywin Lannister's own hand, instructing certain outriders to commit a vile act. I believe it references the brutality in the sack of King's Landing, near the war's end. If one had that letter, the blame for the slaying of Princess Elia and her children might be laid at Tywin's feet rather than pinned solely on Gregor Clegane. The letter remains locked away, presumably, in the Tower of the Hand, or so I suspect. But I have not confirmed it beyond doubt." The words set Oberyn's heart pounding. That was the exact sort of proof he craved. "You think the letter still exists?" "Lord Tywin is not one to leave a paper trail," Tyrion said, clearly skeptical. "If he had such a letter, he'd have destroyed it." Varys lifted a hand, delicate, as if to keep the hush. "Possibly, but Tywin is proud of his cunning. He might consider it a trophy, a testament to his legacy, hidden somewhere only he can access. It wouldn't be the first time a cunning man kept secrets locked away for posterity. He might have kept it to remind himself of how he orchestrated his greatest triumph, or perhaps he stashed it away and forgot it existed. I cannot say for certain, but I have reason to believe it's out there." Oberyn's mouth went dry at the possibility. If that letter comes to light, it changes everything. The realm would see Tywin as the orchestrator, not just a complacent father covering for his monstrous dog. "But it must be found," Tyrion said. Varys bowed his head. "It must be found indeed. I have a clue for you both, from one of my little birds. There is a secret vault accessible from the tower's lower levels. The entrance is masked. It was built in Aegon's day, but Tywin refurbished it while he was hand. I suspect that if a hidden letter remains anywhere, it would be there." Tyrion let out a nervous breath. "Breaking into that vault, if it exists, will not be simple. And if Father catches us—" He trailed off, the implication enough to tighten Oberyn's stomach. But the Red Viper only smiled a deadly grin. "Then we'll have a chance to kill him if he catches us. But let's be subtle first, for the realm's sake." Varys bowed once more and slipped away, leaving Tyrion and Oberyn alone in the gilded twilight. They shared a long look. "Are you certain you wish to risk it?" Tyrion asked. "He is still my father. That father of yours had the mountain crush my sister's skull. If you have any doubts about justice, rest assured, I do not." Tyrion stared out over the city. "No, I have no doubts. I simply marvel that I stand here, about to strike at the man who gave me life. But he's also the man who tried to end it. And so we proceed. Oberyn felt a low tremor of excitement in his belly. Yes, we proceed. They settled on a plan. Oberyn, still convalescent, would feign more weakness than he truly suffered, so that Tywin and the court believed the prince was in no shape to meddle in clandestine affairs. Tyrion would continue to keep to himself, overshadowed by the scandal and heartbreak of Shae's death, as well as his newly precarious standing. Meanwhile, with Varys' help, they would wait for a night when Tywin was occupied elsewhere, namely, in a small council meeting or hosting lords from the Westerlands, and then attempt to find the rumored vault. In the chaotic sprawl of the Red Keep, there would be watchers aplenty, so they'd need diversions. Varys, for his part, promised to misdirect the gold cloaks with a false tip about an assassin creeping near the castle gates, or a suspicious boat on the Blackwater. For nights, Oberyn hardly slept, even though the fever still stirred occasionally, reminding him of his close brush with death. He felt the lightning crackle of purpose surging through him. He spent his waking hours training his wounded body. In private corners of the castle, he tested his reflexes with a short blade, leaning on a cane when fatigue overtook him. He wouldn't be able to match the feats of his prime for some time, but he was still dangerous. If the worst came, if Tywin's men tried to stop him from descending into that vault, Oberyn would ensure they paid in blood. Finally, the night came. The sun set in a wash of crimson clouds that seemed almost too fitting. In the corridors near the Tower of the Hand, a few lanterns glowed. Oberyn wore black breeches, dark leather boots, and a simple dark tunic. His hair, usually so well-groomed, hung loose. Tyrion, equally somber, wore a hooded cloak that brushed the floor. They moved quietly, step by step, through half-forgotten passages. Ones Tyrion had discovered in his youth or that Varys had described. At one turn, a pair of Lannister guards blocked the way, but Tyrion led Oberyn through a tapestry-shrouded alcove. They emerged in a narrow corridor that seemed to run behind the main walls. Oberyn's heart hammered. His side throbbed from the strain, but he bit back the pain. This was the path to justice. They reached a small wooden door with iron bands. Tyrion slid open a hidden panel, revealing a musty set of steps leading downward. The gloom smelled of old stone and dust. They descended carefully, each footstep light. When they reached the bottom, the corridor diverged. One route presumably led to the dungeons, the other to an older section that might connect with the rumored vault. They chose the older route. At last they arrived at a blank stone wall. Tyrion ran his hands over the masonry, searching. Varys said there's a loose stone near the base. That's how the door is meant to open. Oberyn crouched, ignoring the flare of pain in his ribs. He pressed his fingers along the cold stones. Yes, there. One stone was slightly shifted. He pried it free. Behind it was a lever. Oberyn exchanged a quick glance with Tyrion, then pulled the lever. The wall groaned, sliding inward to reveal a dark chamber. Oberyn exhaled. The hush felt like the pause before a storm. He could sense the presence of something secret, something the realm was never meant to see. They stepped inside. The chamber smelled of old paper and stale air. By the faint glow of Tyrion's lantern, Oberyn could see shelves lined with scrolls, ledgers, tomes. It was an archive of sorts, but for what? Possibly for blackmail or the greatest secrets of House Lannister. This is it, Tyrion breathed. He moved to one of the shelves, scanning the spines. Taxes, shipments. Here's something about troop deployments from the War of the Ninepenny Kings. He keeps records of everything. Oberyn's gaze flickered across the gloom. Many of the scrolls were rolled tight, sealed with wax. Some had the Lannister lion stamped on them. Others had no seal at all. He took a step closer. He recalled Varys's tip. The letter would reference the order to kill Elia and her children during the sack. Searching systematically, they began to read the spines, unrolling anything that seemed relevant. Minutes turned into a half hour. The tension made Oberyn's fingers tremble. He could sense the risk. Any moment guards could find them. He pictured Tywin's cold stare as he demanded to know who had dared trespass on his secrets. Oberyn had faced many enemies in his life, but the silent dread of being discovered here, unarmed except for a hidden dagger, made his heart pound all the harder. Then Tyrion said, "Here, I found something." Oberyn rushed over. Tyrion held a small slip of parchment, older than the rest, the edges yellowed. On the top, the words had faded, but the style of the script was unmistakable. Tywin Lannister's distinctive hand. "It's not addressed to Gregor by name," Tyrion muttered as he skimmed it, "but it says, 'Take that which House Targaryen holds most dear. Show no mercy. A swift end to the little ones will prove House Lannister's loyalty to the new order. As for the Dornish princess, let her screams echo through the halls before she dies. This is the order of Tywin Lannister, Hand of the King.'" Oberyn's blood ran cold. A wave of rage slammed through him so powerfully he almost tore the paper to shreds on the spot. But he forced his hand steady, forced his racing mind to focus. This was the proof. He could see the broken seal at the bottom, the golden lion. Tears almost burned in his eyes. "He wrote it," Oberyn whispered. "He told the mountain exactly what to do." So it was not just the warped cruelty of that brute. It was Tywin Lannister's direct command. Tyrion's face was pale. Even he seemed to quiver at the words. "We have it," he said. "This is what we need." Before Oberyn could respond, a noise echoed from the corridor. Boots, several approaching. Oberyn's heart lurched. Tyrion hurriedly tucked the letter into his cloak. "We must hide," he hissed. They glanced around in panic. The shelves were too short to crouch behind effectively. A corner of the chamber was hidden in deeper shadow behind a sagging tapestry. They darted there, pressing themselves against the cold stone, the tapestry hiding them. Oberyn willed his breath to go silent. He clenched his teeth, ignoring the BU. Arryn in his side. The secret door slid open. Faint lamplight spilled in, illuminating the cramped room. Footsteps. Someone stepped inside. From the heavy tread, it sounded like more than one man. Oberyn heard whispered voices, though he could not make out the words. For a moment, his mind spun with the worst possibilities. Tywin had set a trap. They would be caught. The letter would be torn from them. But after a few tense seconds, one of the men said, "We'll check the next tower. The rumor says the assassin was spotted near the back stairs." They turned, their footsteps receding, the secret door sliding shut once more. A few more heartbeats passed in silence. Then Oberyn let himself exhale, trembling with relief. Tyrion peeked out from behind the tapestry. "They're gone," he whispered. Swiftly, they left the vault, though they made sure to push the lever back, returning the stone to its place so no one would suspect an intrusion. Their flight through the narrow corridors felt fraught with danger. Twice more, they heard footsteps and concealed themselves. The second time, Oberyn's side gave a twinge of agony, nearly causing him to groan aloud, but he swallowed it down. By the time they emerged into the more familiar upper halls, Oberyn's tunic was soaked with sweat. But they had the letter. Later, behind the locked door of Oberyn's temporary chambers, they finally dared to look at it again by the light of a single candle. The words were as vile and damning as any Oberyn had ever read, but also the vindication he'd longed for. For all Tywin's cunning, he had left this piece of his guilt behind. "How do we use it?" Tyrion asked, his voice subdued. "Show it to the king? Or the court?" Oberyn scowled. "Tommen is a child. He is little more than a puppet for his mother and grandfather. If we show it in the throne room, Tywin will simply find a way to discredit it or claim it's a forgery. He wields the might of the crown." Tyrion tapped a finger on the edge of the table. "Perhaps we could show it to Prince Doran. He has influence in Dorne, and there might be lords from the Reach or the Vale who still resent my father's power. With enough allied lords behind you, you could challenge Tywin openly. If you forced a proper hearing in front of an assembly of the great houses, it might be impossible for him to bury this." Oberyn weighed the thought. His lips tightened as he recalled his brother, Doran, cautious and deliberate. "My brother will want to move carefully, but if I bring him this letter, he will act. The murder of Elia has haunted House Martell for years. This letter changes everything. There will be justice or there will be war." Tyrion sighed softly. "Justice or war? So often, they are the same. We'll gather allies here in King's Landing if we can. At the least, we'll find a way to share copies with the lords who might side with us. Then we'll confront Tywin. The risk is he might try to silence us before we can gather enough support. Yes, he will, Tyrion said. We'll have to show him that the moment we vanish or meet a suspicious accident, the letter will be scattered to the winds. We'll need to do it quickly before he sniffs out our secret, but not so hastily that we stand alone. Oberyn leaned on the table, ignoring the dull pain in his ribs. We don't have much time. If we wait too long, Tywin's spies will catch wind. We should get a copy to Dorne at once. Tyrion nodded. Varys might help with that. He has means, quiet couriers or the like. Yes, Oberyn agreed. Then perhaps we can ensure it arrives safely in Sunspear, and my brother can rally support. Then, the realm will see Tywin for the monster he is. They parted with the letter tucked in a hidden compartment of Oberyn's trunk, sheathed in oilcloth. Tyrion left with a copy that Oberyn had carefully penned, though Oberyn's hands still shook with rage as he wrote it. That single parchment was proof of everything. The next steps required them to be more than cunning. They had to outmaneuver Tywin Lannister in his own lair. 3 days later, tensions in the Red Keep felt like a tightly wound spring. The incident with the rumored assassin had apparently set the guards on edge. Tywin was rumored to be in a foul mood, though that was hardly a surprise. Oberyn, still feigning a slower recovery, took private meals. Meanwhile, Tyrion kept his usual sarcastic presence at court, but Oberyn noticed the imp's occasional glances toward his father, like a wolf sizing up a wounded stag. It wasn't until dusk on the third day that Oberyn learned Varys had arranged a swift ship to carry the letter to Dorne. They would sail under the cover of darkness with a trusted courier. Tyrion and Oberyn met in Oberyn's chambers to finalize their preparations. Ellaria Sand was there, too, finally returned from the small estate where she'd been waiting while Oberyn recovered. The relief on her face to see Oberyn alive was tempered by the storm clouds in her eyes. She wanted vengeance as fiercely as Oberyn did. "We have not spoken since the fight," she told him, voice trembling with pent-up fury. "All I could think was how close you came to dying. How close you came to leaving me alone in this viper's den. Promise me you'll be careful." Oberyn took her hands gently. "I promise. But you know me, my love. I cannot let the crimes against Elia go unanswered." She nodded, tears shining. "I want to see Tywin Lannister burn." Tyrion cleared his throat softly, giving Ellaria a respectful nod. "We all do, but burning him is less important than exposing him, so that even those who once cowered under his shadow cannot deny what he is." Ellaria's eyes flicked to him, acknowledging his presence. For all that Tyrion was a Lannister, Oberyn sensed Ellaria was slowly coming to accept him as an ally, at least in this cause. That night, the courier set sail, carrying a sealed letter addressed to Prince Doran Martell. Another copy was given to Varys for safekeeping. Oberyn and Tyrion had distributed partial copies to a few carefully chosen lords who, for various reasons, despised the Lannisters' hold on the Iron Throne. Thus, Tywin could not simply order Oberyn or Tyrion killed without risking that letter spreading across the Seven Kingdoms. And so the game began in earnest. Word drifted through the castle that Tywin was growing restless. He summoned Cersei to private councils, and news from the Westerlands suggested House Lannister was sending more men to King's Landing, though the stated reason was to bolster the city guard. Oberyn took to carrying a blade whenever he left his chambers, and he made sure Ellaria was never alone. Tyrion, for his part, tried to keep up his usual wry presence at court, though he often found frosty receptions from his father or sullen stares from Cersei. The rumor still lingered that Tyrion had a hand in Joffrey's poisoning, though the trial by combat had acquitted him. That shadow never truly faded, which allowed him a sort of anonymity in plain sight. No one was certain if he was truly friend or foe. One day, as Oberyn limped across the courtyard, he felt eyes upon him. He turned to see Jaime Lannister leaning against a column, arms folded. The Kingslayer's expression was unreadable. Oberyn returned the stare. "How fares your sword hand?" Oberyn asked, not bothering to hide the mockery in his tone. Jaime raised an eyebrow. "I manage well enough," he replied. Then after a beat, he said quietly, "I heard you nearly died, but you didn't. I also hear you want father's head on a spike." Oberyn studied him. "Your father orchestrated the murder of my sister and her children. You know that, don't you?" Jaime's jaw clenched. "He denies it, says it was all Gregor's doing. But I was close enough to the truth to wonder." Oberyn gave a bitter laugh. "Close enough, but you never spoke against it." Jaime looked away, his features tense. "Some things were beyond my power to stop. I was a young man in the Kingsguard, sworn to protect Aerys Targaryen, who was himself a butcher of the realm. You think I relish any of it?" Oberyn took a step closer, ignoring the twinge in his side. "If you have any sense of justice in you, Jaime Lannister, you will not stand in my way when I bring your father to account." Jaime's eyes flicked up, searching Oberyn's. "If you try that, and father has his men turn on you, there's nothing I can do. I'm not sure I'd stop them. He is my father." Oberyn gave a curt nod. "Your father, yes, but no father to Tyrion, not truly. He despises Tyrion. And if I have my way, your father will soon be the most hated man in the Seven Kingdoms." A muscle in Jaime's cheek twitched. "I've heard a rumor swirling in the castle. Some letter that will damn him. Is that your plan?" Oberyn said nothing, letting the silence speak volumes. Jaime exhaled, turned on his heel and walked away. Oberyn felt a flicker of pity, though only a flicker. Jaime was part of that golden family that had brought so much misery to House Martell. But in the end, Jaime seemed almost powerless, torn by love and hate for the man who had shaped him. Within a week of that encounter, something changed in the undercurrents of King's Landing. Tywin must have sensed the shift. More and more, Oberyn noticed how the Lannisters' loyal guards lurked around every corner. The atmosphere was taut. Whispers came of heated discussions in the small council. Word arrived from Dorne that Prince Doran had quietly begun calling banners. Nothing overt, but enough that the rest of the realm took notice. Tywin was not a fool. He could feel the noose tightening. At last, a raven arrived for Oberyn. It was from Doran. He read the parchment in private, with Tyrion waiting nearby. "My dear brother," Oberyn murmured, paraphrasing. "He says he has quietly spread the word to the High Lords of Dorne of Tywin Lannister's guilt. The letter is being passed around. They are outraged. There's talk of demanding the king remove Tywin from his seat as hand. And if the king does not, House Martell will be forced to act. Doran is urging me to press the matter publicly in King's Landing, to force the crown to hold Tywin accountable under the realm's laws." Tyrion rubbed his chin. "Is it enough? The king is a child. The crown is effectively your father's to command. The only way this works is if enough of the great houses stand behind House Martell in condemnation. Or if we can produce this letter before a large enough assembly that Tywin cannot simply hush it up." Oberyn's hand shook slightly on the parchment. "We need to force a public confrontation. Make Tywin defend himself in front of the court, lords from across Westeros. If he tries to dismiss it, we brandish the letter, read it aloud to every corner of the city. We present testimony from those who fought in the sack of King's Landing, those who know Gregor was acting under direct orders. And if the crown tries to arrest us, the realm will see it as a blatant cover-up. War might follow, but so be it." Tyrion's eyes glimmered with a fierce determination. "Let's do it. Let's call for a grand hearing. My father will try to crush the notion, but if it happens in the throne room, in front of the king and the entire court, if you declare your accusation as a Prince of Dorne, no one can simply throw you in the black cells without uproar. By the time father tries anything, the story will have spread like wildfire." Oberyn set Doran's letter aside. "We'll send out invitations, official letters to the lords in the city, to the small council, to the king. We'll declare that Prince Oberyn Martell of Dorne demands justice for the murder of his sister, Princess Elia. Let Tywin try to ignore that." Tyrion nodded, a ghost of a smile crossing his lips. "I'll distribute the summons personally, and I'll make sure father knows what's coming." That night, Oberyn could hardly sleep. Memories of Elia whirled in his dreams, her face lit by candlelight, her voice saying, "What are you going to do, Oberyn?" He answered in the dream, "Bring justice." Finally, he woke with tears on his cheeks. Ellaria was beside him, gently stroking his hair, telling him that all would be well. They set the hearing for 2 days hence, at midday in the throne room. By the time dawn broke on the appointed day, half the city buzzed with the rumor. Prince Oberyn was going to accuse the hand of the king of a heinous war crime. The great hall was lined with gold-armored knights and courtiers drawn by curiosity. Tommen sat on the iron throne, dwarfed by the steel blades that loomed behind him. Beside him stood Cersei, her face tight with anger. On the other side, Mace Tyrell and Pycelle lingered, each uncertain what to expect. Jaime lingered near the throne as part of the Kingsguard. Tyrion was absent from the dais, choosing instead to stand in the crowd, a slight smirk on his face as if he were a visitor. When Oberyn entered, a hush gripped the hall. He wore robes of deep red and gold in homage to Dorne, and Ellaria walked behind him, a steady pillar of support. Oberyn's injuries had not fully healed. His footsteps were still measured, but he kept his head high, his gaze fierce. Prince Doran, too frail to travel, had sent a small entourage of Dornish lords in his stead. They fanned out behind Oberyn, their eyes equally determined. At the foot of the throne, Oberyn bowed to the king, though he did not kneel. Tommen blinked, uncertain how to respond. Cersei glared, as if offended by the subtle breach in protocol. Then Tywin himself stepped forward from the side. The old lion looked as imposing as ever, dressed in the black and gold of House Lannister. He regarded Oberyn with an expression of cool disdain. "Prince Oberyn," Tywin said, his voice echoing across the hall. "We stand here at your request. May I ask the reason for this sudden demand of court time?" Oberyn's voice rang out. "I requested a formal assembly so that the realm may hear the truth regarding the fate of my sister, Princess Elia of Dorne, and her children, Rhaenys and Aegon Targaryen, during the sack of King's Landing. It is time we name the one truly responsible for their deaths." A ripple of murmurs ran through the assembled lords and ladies. Tywin's jaw tightened. "That was many years ago. The tragedy has been lamented by all. Gregor Clegane was the man who committed the murders. He has paid with his life." "Has he? For many years, you granted him lands and titles," Oberyn retorted, stepping forward. "But you do not dispute that he was the killer. Which begs the question, who gave him his orders?" Tywin's lip curled. "He had no orders beyond those that come in the chaos of war. Soldiers commit atrocities in the heat of the moment. It was regrettable, but neither I nor the crown commanded the mountain to." "Enough lies," Oberyn snapped, letting his fury surge. He turned, gesturing to the hall. "People of King's Landing, hear me. I have proof, written proof, in Tywin Lannister's own hand, that he explicitly commanded Gregor Clegane to kill Princess Elia and her children, and to do so in the cruelest manner possible." Gasps erupted. Cersei's face paled. Jaime's eyes widened, his stance shifting. Mace Tyrell glanced uncertainly at Tywin. Tywin's own face went stony. "Where is this so-called proof?" Tywin demanded. Oberyn reached inside his tunic and withdrew the parchment, carefully held in a leather sheath. "Right here, sealed with the Lion of House Lannister, dated at the time of the sack." He turned to the king. "With your permission, your grace, I would read it." Tommen squirmed, looking to his mother for guidance. Cersei hissed something under her breath, but the boy nodded. "Read it," he said timidly, though the power of that order still carried the authority of the throne. Oberyn broke the hush by unrolling the parchment and reading each word slowly, clearly, letting the horror of its instructions fill the hall. He read Tywin's signature at the bottom, then turned, eyes scanning the assembled crowd. "You all hear it. This is no forgery. We have the seal, the handwriting. There are even men still living who can attest to receiving these orders. Prince Doran Martell has copies, as do other lords beyond this city. Even if I am killed here and now, the truth will spread." A wave of unease spread among the courtiers. Tyrion watched from the sidelines, still as stone. Cersei spat. "This is an outrage, a falsehood. Someone must have forged his hand." "Enough!" Tywin's voice thundered, a single word that silenced Cersei. He fixed Oberyn with a glare cold enough to freeze. "I will not stand here and be accused by the likes of you." "Me?" Oberyn hissed. "A prince of Dorne, whose sister you butchered. You will answer for your crime." Across the hall, lords and ladies exchanged stunned looks. The gold cloaks shifted uncertainly. Oberyn wondered if Tywin would call for an immediate arrest. But that would only confirm his guilt in the eyes of many. For a moment, Tywin appeared poised on a knife's edge, his pride demanding he strike, but his cunning stalling him. Then Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "Lord Hand, if this letter is genuine, the realm must know the truth. The murder of a Dornish princess is no small matter. The Tyrells have no wish for conflict with Dorne." "Nor do we," added one of the Dornish lords behind Oberyn. "But we demand justice." Slowly, other lords murmured their agreement. This was no longer a private matter. The seeds Oberyn had sown, through Tyrion, Varys, Doran's letters, were sprouting. Tywin stood alone on the dais, while Tommen shrank back into the throne, confused and frightened. Jaime's brow furrowed, as if unsure whether to defend his father or remain silent. "Justice," Tywin said, voice dripping with contempt, "would have recognized that Elia was married to the heir of the Mad King who was burning innocent men alive. It was war. War does not excuse the slaughter of children," Oberyn said, "and the manner of their killing was monstrous. Your letter spells it out. Show no mercy. Let her screams echo through the halls before she dies. That is not an act of war. That is sadism." Tywin's composure cracked for a fleeting second, something like fury in his eyes. Then he drew himself up. "You dare speak to the hand of the king with such insolence? I will remind you that the king's hand is second only to the king himself." Oberyn strode forward until he was only a few paces from the dais. "Then let the king speak. Let young Tommen, who sits on that throne, order me silenced if he wishes. Let him declare that murdering an innocent woman and her children is pardoned in his realm." Tommen shook his head, clearly out of his depth, glancing anxiously at Cersei. She, for once, had no immediate quip. Tywin seemed to realize that no help would come from the boy king. The entire hall's eyes were on him. The hush was absolute. In that hush, Oberyn felt the weight of years of sorrow, felt Elia's presence. He would never see her again, never hear her laugh, but at least he could honor her. Tywin drew a slow breath, scanning the crowd. "If you want your justice, Martell, perhaps you should name a champion again." Oberyn stiffened. A wave of shock rippled through the crowd at Tywin's words. Another trial by combat? Was Tywin so sure of victory, or was he so cornered he saw no other path? Then Tyrion stepped forward from the throng, voice carrying loud and clear. "A trial by combat? I believe we tried that once, father, and your champion lost his Arryn in his side." The secret door slid open. Faint lamplight spilled in, illuminating the cramped room. Footsteps. Someone stepped inside. From the heavy tread, it sounded like more than one man. Oberyn heard whispered voice, "Decide." Oberyn looked at Tyrion. A swirl of emotions roiled within him. Excitement, trepidation, a grim sense of déjà vu. He had triumphed over the mountain, but only barely. He was still not fully recovered. If Tywin named some new beast, or if he forced Jaime to fight in his name, Oberyn might not stand a chance. But perhaps there was another way. Before he could speak, Tyrion interjected. "As a Lannister and your son, I have some standing in this matter. Allow me to champion Prince Oberyn's accusation, should he accept me." That caused a ripple of confusion. Oberyn glanced at Tyrion in surprise. Tyrion's posture was stiff, but his face held a quiet determination. "Father," Tyrion went on, "you have always hated me. You tried to have me executed. Now you wish to rely on a trial by combat as your shield. Let me oppose you in the field, and we will see who the gods favor." Shouts of astonishment rose. A son challenging his own father. Tywin's hand clenched, the cords in his neck standing out. "You are no knight," he snarled. "What madness is this?" Tyrion lifted his chin. "Madness or truth, father? Let the realm see if you prefer to fight your own battles or hide behind others once more. I can name a champion if you'd rather fight by proxy. You can name Jaime or whomever you wish. But the fact remains. You stand accused, I stand as witness to your nature, and the letter stands as evidence." Silence reigned. Oberyn saw how Tywin's face flickered with conflicting emotions. On one hand, Tywin might name Jaime as champion. Jaime was a formidable swordsman. Even with his missing hand, he'd recovered some skill. Or Tywin could name someone else. But who could he trust with a fight to the death? If that champion lost, Tywin's guilt would be sealed in the eyes of the realm. On the other hand, if Tywin refused trial by combat now, it would look like admission of guilt. Cersei stepped forward, anger burning in her eyes. "Enough! This is absurd. We should simply seize the letter, seize Oberyn and Tyrion, and—" "Do it," Oberyn said, his voice cutting through hers. "Try to seize us. The realm will call you accomplices in murder. Dorne already marches. Lord Tyrell stands uncertain. The Stormlands could rise next if they see the crown is nothing but hypocrisy. Act if you dare, but you will not survive this." It was a gamble, goading them so openly, but Oberyn saw doubt seize hold of Cersei. Even she wasn't rash enough to plunge the realm into another war without cause. Tywin's calculating gaze swept the hall. At last he said in a cold voice, "Very well. I name Jaime Lannister as my champion. Let the gods judge." All eyes turned to Jaime. His face blanched. He stared at his father, uncertain. But a vow was a vow, and Tywin had named him. If Jaime refused, that was a public betrayal. A hush. Then Jaime finally spoke, bitterness saturating his tone. "You name me to defend you against the crime of butchering Elia and her children?" Tywin's voice hardened. "Yes, you are a Kingsguard sworn to defend the realm. I was hand of the king at the time. I was serving the realm." "Were you?" Jaime asked, loud enough for all to hear. But no denial of the challenge came. He closed his eyes, then opened them, turning to address the crowd. "I will fight, so be it. But I will fight for my own honor, not for yours." Oberyn swallowed, stepping forward. "Then we have a contest. But I warn you, I may not be fully recovered from my last trial by combat. And it was your father's champion who nearly took my life then. I'd rather name another champion for me." He turned to Tyrion. "If you wish to stand for me, Lannister, I accept. Though how do you propose to fight your brother?" Tyrion squared his shoulders. "I wasn't planning on fighting him personally. I would name a champion as well." Jaime's lips parted. "Who do you name, Tyrion?" "Bronn." Tyrion gave a rueful half-smile. "That would have been my first choice, but dear sister Cersei saw to it that Bronn was unavailable. However, there is another. Someone who might be more than a match for the Kingslayer." At that moment, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. A tall woman, armor gleaming. Brienne of Tarth. She advanced, her expression grave. "I will stand for Tyrion Lannister," she said. "I owe him a debt for how he treated me with respect, and for my friend, Lady Sansa. And I once swore to fight for the sake of justice." A stunned hush. Jaime's face colored with a tide of emotion. The tension between him and Brienne was palpable. But it seemed that fate had chosen. Oberyn felt a strange relief. Fighting Jaime in his current state might have ended badly. But Brienne was known to be a warrior of remarkable skill and honor. Jaime, hindered by the loss of his sword hand, would have a stiff challenge. Tywin's face was a mask of cold rage. He understood that he had been cornered into a trial by combat that he might lose. But he saw no way out. The date was set, and within days, the entire city knew of the impending duel. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, would face Brienne of Tarth in single combat to determine Tywin Lannister's guilt or innocence in the murder of Elia Martell and her children. Tensions soared. Rumors abounded. Some said Jaime had regained his old prowess with his left hand. Others said Brienne was a she-bear in human form, unstoppable. Oberyn spent that time quietly continuing to recover. Tyrion spent hours in discussion with Brienne, ensuring she was well prepared. Tywin all but vanished from public view, but Oberyn had no doubt he was plotting 100 ways to sabotage the contest, or to ensure Jaime's victory by any means. Oberyn took precautions, ordering men loyal to Dorne to guard Brienne's chambers, and warning them to watch for poison or other sabotage. At last, the day of the duel arrived. The courtyard had been prepared with a raised platform, encircled by a ring of royal guards to keep spectators at a distance. Tommen, Cersei, Tywin, Oberyn, and half the court gathered to watch. The hush was thick with anticipation. Jaime stood in shimmering gold armor, minus the helm, his short-cropped hair glinting in the sun. His golden right hand had been replaced with an ornate prosthetic. A sword was belted at his left hip. On the other side, Brienne wore plain but sturdy steel plate, her expression solemn. She drew Oathkeeper, the Valyrian steel blade Jaime himself had given her. That gesture alone bristled with irony. The herald proclaimed the stakes. If Jaime Lannister won, Tywin would be deemed innocent. If Brienne won, Tywin would be found guilty. In that event, the crown would have no choice but to remove him from office and place him under arrest. The realm waited with bated breath. Then the horn sounded, and the two warriors advanced. Jaime took a classic stance, sword in his left hand. Brienne circled, her eyes fixed on his movements. The first clash of steel rang out like thunder. Jaime struck quickly, testing her defenses, but she parried. Oberyn watched every blow, wincing with each strike. He saw glimpses of Jaime's famed technique, quick footwork, cunning angles. But the left hand was not as strong or as precise as the right once had been. And Brienne had improved since their last encounter, as if her convictions fueled her skill. Back and forth they danced, the crowd transfixed. Jaime managed a feint that slipped past her guard, slashing across Brienne's upper arm. She grimaced but did not falter. She retaliated with a powerful overhead swing that sent Jaime staggering. Their swords sang, sparks flying as Valyrian steel met castle-forged steel. Jaime was panting, sweat running down his face, but his eyes held a desperate determination. Was it a desire to protect his father, or perhaps to prove himself once more the knight he used to be? Brienne pressed him, step by step, her sword strokes measured and relentless. Her shield blocked his counterattacks. Jaime tried a cunning maneuver, hooking his foot behind hers to trip her, but Brienne saw it coming and drove her shoulder into him, knocking him off balance. He stumbled. She slashed at his helmless head. Only a quick duck saved him, the blade slicing through air. Jaime flung himself backward, desperate to gain distance. Tywin watched from the stands, face grim. Cersei looked frantic, her nails digging into the wooden rail. Tyrion stood near Oberyn, face set, whispering encouragement under his breath. Jaime tried one last surge. With a ferocious roar, he lunged, blade whistling. Brienne caught the blow on her sword, twisted her wrist, and the ring of steel on steel was deafening. Jaime's sword flew from his hand, clattering across the wooden platform. He stood unarmed, Brienne's blade leveled at his throat. In the hush that followed, Jaime panted, chest heaving. Brienne's voice was quiet, but it carried across the courtyard. "Yield," she demanded. Jaime stared at her, agony and shame warring on his face. He glanced sidelong at his father, then closed his eyes. "I yield," he whispered. "The gods have judged." A roar erupted among the spectators. Shock, cheers, curses. Cersei screamed, "No!" as if to deny reality. Tywin stood, furious, his fists clenched. Tommen trembled on the seat of judgment. The herald declared Brienne the victor. Under the terms of the duel, Tywin Lannister was found guilty of the crimes Oberyn had charged. At once, the Dornish lords behind Oberyn raised a shout of triumph. Oberyn was trembling with fierce relief, tears threatening to well in his eyes. Elia, Rhaenys, Aegon, at last the realm recognized their murder. Gold cloaks rushed forward, uncertain whom they should obey. For a moment, chaos threatened. Tywin barked, "Stand aside! I am the hand of the king." But many of the guards hesitated. Mace Tyrell, face chalky, cleared his throat. "The trial by combat is completed. The hand of the king is guilty." Tyrion stepped forward, voice ringing. "Guards, in the name of King Tommen, arrest Tywin Lannister." Tywin's glare could have melted steel. "You dare!" But half the gold cloaks advanced, uncertain but determined to follow the verdict. Jaime stood amid them, unarmed, his face betraying heartbreak and conflict. Tywin reached for the nearest guard's sword, but the guard backed away, leveling his weapon in warning. Rage contorted Tywin's features, all his power and cunning undone. Cersei shrieked, grabbing Tommen's arm as if to flee with him, but the boy just sat there, wide-eyed, not knowing what to do. In the swirl of tension, Oberyn strode up to Tywin. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. "You killed my sister," Oberyn said, voice low, trembling with fury. "This is the justice I've craved for so many years. Now face it. The realm will see you pay." Tywin did not speak. He only stared with cold hatred, as though still believing he could will the world to bend to him. At last, the gold cloaks closed in, resting him backward, clamping manacles around his wrists. He was led away, Cersei screaming curses after them. The courtyard erupted in confusion. Some lords hurrying away, others exclaiming in shock, and the small folk who had gathered to watch cheering at the dramatic conclusion. Through it all, Oberyn stood tall, ignoring the pain in his ribs, ignoring the swirl of everything. He felt Illyria's hand on his arm, tears glistening in her eyes. "Oberyn," she whispered. "We did it. You did it." Tyrion limped over, face etched with 1,000 emotions. "I never believed I'd see my father in chains," he said quietly. "By the gods, this is real." Brienne approached, lowering her sword. Jaime still stood behind her, shoulders slumped. For a moment, Jaime and Tyrion exchanged a look of something like sympathy. "You had to do it," Jaime said quietly. "For yourself, not just for him." Tyrion's throat bobbed. He reached to place a hand on Jaime's shoulder, but Jaime pulled away, shame and sorrow lighting his eyes. Then he turned and walked away without a word. Oberyn, watching that, felt a pang. Despite all the hatred he carried for House Lannister, seeing Jaime so torn made him realize that even the proud lions were human, with loyalties that cut deep. But that did not lessen Tywin's guilt. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Tywin was stripped of his title as Hand. A royal council convened, with lords from several regions in attendance, to decide Tywin's fate. Oberyn presented the letter, the proven authenticity of Tywin's seal, and even one or two men who confessed to being outriders carrying out Tywin's orders all those years ago. It was damning. Cersei raged, threatened, tried to manipulate Tommen into saving Tywin, but the Child King was too confused, and the rest of the council saw no choice but to remove Tywin permanently from power. Dorne demanded he face a formal trial for war crimes, though some lords balked at that term. In the end, a compromise was reached. Tywin would remain imprisoned until the next Great Council, which would determine the final sentence. Dorne insisted the penalty must be death, or at least exile and the forfeit of all lands. The crown, or what was left of it, splintered in its response. The realm shook as word spread that Tywin Lannister, the infamous Lord of Casterly Rock, was a murderer who had ordered the slaying of innocents in the sack of King's Landing. From the Red Keep's balcony, Oberyn watched the city's reaction. Some cursed him, for they feared Lannister retribution. Others cheered him, for the Lannisters had caused them grief, or they simply liked to see a powerful man brought low. Tyrion walked out to join him, scanning the sprawl of rooftops and winding streets. "My father's downfall is certain," Tyrion said softly, "though the realm might pay a heavy price for it. There will be power vacuums, alliances shifting. The Tyrells might push Tommen to put Marjorie in full control. The Iron Bank might recall debts." Oberyn nodded. Yes, the realm does not change easily, but it needed to change. He let the breeze ruffle his hair. For the first time since Elaya's death, he felt the possibility of peace stirring in his heart. I do not regret it. Dorne will stand behind me, and if the rest of the realm does not wish to see more bloodshed, let them accept that justice was done. Tyrion managed a faint smile. I never thought I'd see the day I'd assist someone in toppling my father, but perhaps I have found a better cause. Elia Martell did not deserve her fate. Neither did her children. If I had known the truth earlier, he trailed off, shaking his head. I will accept the new order, whatever it may be. They lingered in silence, watching the flicker of torches in the city below as evening settled in. In the distance, bells tolled softly, announcing some small ceremony or funeral. King's Landing was a place of endless shifting alliances, but for the moment, Oberyn felt a measure of triumph. He pressed his hand to the bandaged scar beneath his tunic. The wounds might never fully heal, but a piece of his soul felt lighter. The face of Elia in his memories seemed gentler now, less haunted. He had avenged her death. He had exposed Tywin Lannister's darkest crime. And he had done it not alone, but with the strangest ally imaginable. The imp, Tyrion Lannister, Tywin's own son. Before Oberyn turned to go, Ellaria appeared behind them, resting a hand on Oberyn's shoulder. My love, she said softly. The world sees Tywin for what he is, at last. Perhaps we can leave the city soon and return home, and leave the Lannisters to their own battles. Oberyn placed his hand over hers. Soon, he promised. We will. But first, I want to see him sentenced. I want the realm to know how a man who butchers children is punished. Ellaria nodded. Then she took a breath, brushing tears from her eyes. Yes, of course. Tyrion gave a small bow to Ellaria, then turned to Oberyn. I do not think the crown will remain stable for long with father gone. Cersei will cling to power. She will want you gone or dead, if she can manage it. You realize that? Oberyn's lips curved. She can try, but I still have life in me, and Dorne at my back. Tyrion gave a bitter laugh. You and I, both exiles in spirit, if not in truth. That could be a story for the ages. Or the beginning of something new, Oberyn said quietly. In the weeks to follow, the Red Keep turned into a battlefield of politics. Cersei fought tooth and nail to have Tywin released. The new small council, shaped by Tyrell influence, insisted on caution, not wanting to incite a Dornish revolt by letting Tywin go free. Meanwhile, the letters to Dorne continued, and Prince Doran's voice gained traction among certain lords who were weary of Lannister dominance. Slowly but surely, the crown recognized that Tywin had become a liability they could not salvage. A great council was scheduled for the coming year, with all the major houses called to attend and pass sentence on the former hand. Throughout that time, Oberyn and Tyrion occasionally walked the gardens of the Red Keep together, discussing the realm's uncertain future. Rumor said that Stannis Baratheon had seized new ground in the north, while the Ironborn stirred on the coasts. War was always near, a raven waiting to feast on corpses. But for Oberyn, the vengeance he had sought so single-mindedly, for so many years, now lay within his grasp. Tywin was in chains. Elaya's name was cleansed. One afternoon, Oberyn and Tyrion strolled amid the overgrown hedges, the sun warming their shoulders. Strange, Oberyn remarked, that I feel almost empty now. I spent half my life longing for this, and now that I have it, I wonder what is left. Tyrion gave him a sideways glance. A life in Dorne, with Ellaria and your daughters. A chance to shape the realm in a better image. You have potential, Oberyn Martell, to be more than just the man who avenged his sister. Oberyn considered that. A small smile tugged at his lips. You speak with more hope than I would expect from a man who just toppled his own father. Tyrion exhaled. I have little hope for myself, but maybe others can do better. I'll settle for seeing a realm that doesn't blindly worship the lion's banner. Perhaps I'll travel. I've heard Essos has wines that make the arbor's best taste like donkey piss. That made Oberyn chuckle. If you do, be sure to send me a cask. They reached a bend in the path, near a patch of red flowers swaying in the breeze. Ilaria waited there, greeting them with a warm smile. She took Oberyn's arm, looking at Tyrion with a hint of gratitude. "I suppose I owe you thanks as well, Lord Tyrion," she said softly. "You had no cause to help us, save for your own sense of injustice." Tyrion inclined his head. "Tywin Lannister was my father, but he was never a father to me, and your cause was righteous." Ilaria looked at Oberyn. "I will pack our things soon. Doran summons us back to Sunspear to help settle the new alliances. Will you be ready?" Oberyn nodded. "Yes, as soon as I witness Tywin's final condemnation or see him banished to the Black Cells for good, I will gladly return. I want to see the water gardens, taste the Dornish peppers, feel the southern sun on my face. I'm done with this city of secrets and shadows." Ilaria's eyes shone, and she pulled Oberyn closer. Tyrion watched them with something like wistfulness. Then he turned away, stepping along the garden path, letting them have a private moment. Oberyn, glancing after him, reflected on how unexpected life could be. The man who freed Tyrion from a false murder charge ended up forging a bond with him, exposing the darkest crime of the most powerful man in Westeros. The Red Viper and the Imp united against Tywin Lannister, and they had won. The future more battles, no doubt, but Oberyn felt the sun on his skin and Ilaria's warmth at his side. And for the first time since Elaya's death, hope was no longer a stranger to him. The weeks stretched on. The Great Council was set for 6 months hence, but King's Landing did not wait. Tywin was placed under strict guard in the Red Keep's tower, where he awaited his fate. Cersei tried in vain to rally the Lannister bannermen from the Westerlands, but with Tywin behind bars, their power fractured. Some lords declared neutrality, others quietly condemned Tywin's monstrous acts. Soon, the proud lion of Lannister was caged. Finally, the day came for Oberyn to depart. A Dornish caravan waited in the yard, with horses and carriages, lords and soldiers. Tyrion came to see them off. He and Oberyn clasped hands, an unlikely friendship forged in blood. Oberyn said quietly, "If ever you find yourself in Dorne, you will be welcomed as a friend. The sands can be hot, but the wine is sweet, and the women sweeter." Tyrion mustered a crooked grin. "I just might take you up on that offer someday, my prince." Then his smile faded. "I'm glad to have known you, not only because you saved my life, but because, for once, I've seen the triumph of a just cause. Be well, Oberyn Martell." Oberyn gave a final nod. "Farewell, Tyrion Lannister. May your wit guide you, and may your father's sins not define your future." Ilaria took Oberyn's arm, guiding him to the waiting carriage. As the Dornish party began to roll out, Oberyn glanced back one last time at the Red Keep, perched atop the hill like a vulture on bone. He remembered the day he first arrived, how he had come with vengeance in his heart, how he had danced with death in the arena, how close he came to losing everything. He remembered the moment Gregor Clegane's monstrous strength almost ended his life, and the echo of the crowd's roar. But now, that roar was replaced by the hush of the city's uncertainty. Tywin Lannister had been exposed. For Elia, for Rhaenys, for Aegon, and yes, for himself, Oberyn felt the satisfaction of righting a terrible wrong. The caravan moved, leaving behind the gates, crossing the city at a measured pace, and then forging onto the open road. The air was fresh, the promise of the southern horizon beckoning. When they crested a rise, Oberyn looked out across the land. The future was unwritten. War might come or peace might triumph. But at last, Tywin Lannister would no longer hide behind the shield of power and lies. And so Prince Oberyn Martell rode south, his spirit lighter, his injuries slowly healing, his vow to Elia fulfilled. He was the Red Viper, victor over the mountain, the one who unmasked Tywin's crimes, and perhaps, though he would never say the words, he was grateful to the sharp mind of Tyrion Lannister, who risked everything for the truth. In the days and years to come, the story would be told around many a tavern fire and across the dusty roads from Dorne to the north. How Oberyn Martell survived his duel with the Mountain, how he joined forces with the Imp, and how they revealed the hand of the king for the villain he truly was. Some minstrels put it to rhyme, others turned it into tall tales. But for Oberyn and Tyrion, it was simply reality, one that forever changed the shape of Westeros. The wind teased Oberyn's hair as the Dornish convoy continued its journey. He could almost hear Elaya's voice in that gentle breeze, whispering of gratitude, of release. He bowed his head for a moment, letting his tears fall unseen. Then he raised his face to the sun, and he rode on toward home, knowing that at last justice had been won. Oberyn Martell guided his mount with practiced ease, though every mile he traveled away from King's Landing seemed to weigh differently on his spirit than he had imagined. He'd once dreamed that after bringing Tywin Lannister to account for Elaya's murder, he would ride away from the city with a heart unburdened, vengeance met at last. He had pictured the triumphant feeling of resolution, the sense that every step south was a step back to the life that had been stolen from his family so long ago. Yet he found that reality was far more complex. Satisfaction flickered within him, true, but an odd emptiness, too, followed in the wake of achieving a goal he'd harbored for so many years. Still, he kept his spine straight and his gaze ahead. The Dornish caravan had swelled with guards and lords loyal to House Martell, some of whom had come from Sunspear, others who had been stationed in or around King's Landing, awaiting Oberyn's call. Ellaria Sand rode near him, though at times she chose to move within a curtained litter when the day's sun burned too fiercely or the wind carried the reek of distant farmland. Oberyn found himself looking at her often, as if reassuring himself that she was truly there. The memory of lying half-dead on the sand of the arena still haunted him. He had come so close to leaving her behind. Now the road south hummed with travelers, merchants, and wandering hedge knights. Rumor spread at every crossroads that the old lion's been locked in a cage, or Prince Oberyn of Dorne cut Tywin's claws. Some seemed to doubt, whispering that Tywin would soon bribe his way free, or that the king would have a change of heart and free his grandfather. Others claimed a new war was brewing, with the Westerlands on one side and Dorne on the other, and that each passing day brought the realm closer to open bloodshed. Oberyn listened silently whenever these rumors surfaced around the campfires. He had parted from Tyrion with the promise that the letters, and Tywin's written orders, were secured in multiple hands. Killing Oberyn or abducting him would gain the crown nothing but scandal and insurrection. Still, dangers lingered. Tywin's supporters would not simply fade into the night. To protect themselves, Oberyn and his party made sure never to split too thinly on the road. The pace was deliberate, and at dusk, they often stopped at keeps or inns friendly to Dorne. The air changed as they traveled farther from the capital, losing the thick smell of city refuse, replaced by open fields of barley and spring flowers. The rains that sometimes swept over them felt gentler than the tension in King's Landing. In the stillness of nights, Oberyn would catch himself gazing into the darkness, remembering the expression on Tywin's face when the guards had clasped his wrists in irons. It was a moment he had long fantasized about, yet it brought less fiery triumph than he might have predicted. Perhaps some quiet part of him recognized that a single man in chains could not undo the suffering of a lifetime. Ellaria, sensing his moods, spoke little of the future. Instead, she sometimes reminisced about the evenings they had spent in Sunspear's gardens, singing, dancing, or listening to the sound of water lapping against the marble basins. Oberyn welcomed these memories like a salve. They made him yearn for Dorne not just as a place of political import, but as a home where he could draw breath without the constant weight of vengeance on his shoulders. On the 12th day of travel, the caravan reached a broad, shallow river. The horses and mules splashed through with minimal fuss, though some men had to dismount and steady the wagons. Overhead, the sky was a fierce, cloudless blue. In the heat of midday, Oberyn spotted a trio of travelers on the opposite bank, waving for parley. At first, his guards tensed, gripping the hilts of their spears. But as the strangers approached, they lowered their hoods, revealing copper-hued complexions and the distinctive, narrow features that often marked the Dornish. One was a young woman with a swirl of red cloth about her shoulders. She introduced herself as Miria Jordain, a minor lady whose family hailed from the Tor, come to meet Prince Oberyn and act as a guide for the southern roads. "Our Prince Doran sends word. We are to escort you safely through these next lands," As bandits may lurk, Miria said, bowing low from horseback. I have a handful of men at my command. If it pleases you, we'll ride at the edges of your column to guard against ambush. Oberyn smiled. The simple courtesy and sense of solidarity that came from meeting more of his people touched him more than he expected. That pleases me well, my lady. You and your men are welcome to join us. Any word from Sunspear that we should know? She handed him a sealed letter bearing the Martell sun and spear sigil. Oberyn broke the wax with careful fingers and unrolled the parchment. Prince Doran's neat script greeted him. His older brother wrote, Oberyn, though I wish I could greet you in person, my health is as it ever was. I remain watchful, receiving envoys from various kingdoms who have an interest in Tywin Lannister's fate. Our banners stand ready if events in King's Landing turn sour. Many a lord now courts us, pressing concerns, alliances, and offers of marriage. For the time being, we wait upon the Great Council to convene as arranged. King Tommen's advisors have confirmed it will be held in King's Landing, 6 moons from now, to officially pass judgment on Tywin. I suspect delays or attempts at manipulation, but they cannot bury the truth so easily. Not when so many have a copy of that letter. Travel safely, and know that you shall find Sunspear's gates open wide for you. We have much to discuss. Doran Martell, Prince of Dorne. Oberyn folded the letter and tucked it away, exhaling a soft breath as he took in the news. The mention of envoys seeking alliances stirred a flicker of the old cunning in his heart. These lords, who once turned a deaf ear to Dorne's grief, were now quick to pay respects. Dorne's position had changed in a matter of weeks. Vengeance was a powerful currency, it seemed, and with Tywin indicted for war crimes, many across the 7 kingdoms wondered if Dorne was on the cusp of a new, pivotal influence. We'll press on, Oberyn told Miria Jordain, but at a safe pace. Let us not wander from the main road. If bandits do come, they'll have a poor day of it. She smiled. Dornish spears have always been more formidable than bandits expect. The column continued. Over the next few days, they passed farmland that gradually gave way to drier, rockier terrain. Less farmland, more shrubs and spiny trees. The sunsets glowed a deep gold on the western horizon, and Oberyn noticed Ilaria growing more buoyant with each day. She hummed old tunes beneath her breath, her eyes reflecting the desert's luminous color. Each evening, they made camp in some sheltered grove or near a water source, posting double watches. Once, a ragged band of men emerged from the scrub at night, likely hoping to loot or capture travelers. But the Dornish outriders spotted them early, and a volley of crossbow bolts whistled in warning. The bandits slunk away, leaving the camp untroubled. Oberyn himself never had to draw his blade. He was relieved by that. His wounds remained tender, especially if he twisted too quickly or braced himself too hard in the saddle. Though the outward bruises were fading, the deeper aches still lingered. The scarring on his face, from where Gregor's gauntlet had raked him, formed a pink line that curved near his temple. Sometimes, at odd moments, the memory of that monstrous grip made him shiver. He reminded himself that the mountain was gone forever, lying in a cold tomb, undone by poison. On the 20th day, the path crossed the Prince's Pass. That was the moment Oberyn felt the shift. The dryness of the air, the taste of dust on the wind, the sharp lines of the mountain ridges rising all around them. This was Dorne proper, a harsh, sun-soaked land that could kill the unwary, but it was home. In all his travels, Essos, the free cities, the far corners of Westeros, he had never found a place that quite matched the proud resilience of Dorne. Sprawling canyons and hidden oases, burning sands and defiant cliff faces. It shaped its people as much as they shaped it. At last, after many more days of winding roads and scorching midday heat, they glimpsed Sunspear in the distance. Even from afar, the tall spear towers that gave the castle its name cut a striking silhouette against the sky. Pale pink stone glimmered, and beyond it, Oberyn could see a swath of ocean glinting like molten sapphire under the sun. The sight drew a soft exhale of relief from him. Ilaria, riding near, let out a delighted sound. "There it is," she said quietly. "I can almost feel the ocean breeze." "As can I," Oberyn murmured. He spurred his horse onward, not wanting to waste another moment. Word of their approach had preceded them. By the time the caravan reached the outer walls, a small gathering of retainers and guards were waiting. Servants rushed forward, bowing and taking reins. The heavy gates opened, and Oberyn saw the old courtyard with its mosaic tile floor, the sun and spear crest displayed proudly near the gatehouse. Palace attendants in flowing Dornish robes greeted them. He recognized many faces, though some wore deeper lines of age than when he'd last departed for King's Landing. That fact carried a certain sting. Time did not pause to let any man complete his vendettas. They escorted Oberyn and Ellaria through the outer bailey and into the palace proper. There, columns of pale marble framed open-air corridors that let in warm breezes from the sea. Servants bustled, carrying pitchers of cool water, fresh fruit, and damp cloths to wipe away the dust of travel. Oberyn allowed himself a moment of indulgence, pressing one of the cloths to his forehead and closing his eyes as the tension of the journey melted away. "Prince Oberyn, my lord," said Hoda, the tall Nervashi captain of guards. He bowed, then motioned for Oberyn to follow. "Prince Doran awaits you in the solar." Ellaria took Oberyn's hand. "Shall I come with you?" "If you wish," Oberyn said. "My brother likely wants to speak of matters that concern us both. Though, if you'd rather rest." She shook her head. "I'll stand with you. I want to hear all that transpires." They walked through the cool corridors, passing fountains and flowering vines that spilled over stone balconies. Sunspear was as Oberyn remembered it. A place of color and shadow, full of quiet corners and hidden courtyards, each holding memories of the Martell family's storied past. Sandstone arches rose above them as they ascended a short flight of steps to the solar's entrance. Guards stood on either side, halberds in hand, but they bowed deeply as Oberyn approached, stepping aside to let him pass. The solar itself was bathed in golden afternoon light. Sliding shutters allowed in a gentle sea breeze. Brightly woven rugs covered the floor, and cushions were scattered near a low table. Prince Doran sat in a cushioned chair with raised armrests to accommodate his weak legs. He turned his head at their entrance, and a flicker of relief crossed his features. Though Doran had always possessed a bearing of quiet dignity, Oberyn saw that his brother looked older. His hair, once black, was mostly gray now, and lines of pain etched his forehead. Yet when his gaze fell on Oberyn, warmth lit in his dark eyes. "Oberyn," Doran murmured. He set aside a small ledger on the table. "Come here, my brother." Oberyn crossed the solar, and Doran raised a hand. Oberyn took it gently, bending to press a fraternal kiss to Doran's cheek. A wave of emotion surged in him, surprising in its intensity. Vengeance had so consumed his life, and he had rarely paused to wonder how that might have weighed on Doran, who had also lost a sister and 2 young niece and nephew in that tragedy. Ellaria bowed her head. "My prince," she said softly. Doran inclined his head in return. "Ellaria, be welcome. You must both be exhausted. Sit, rest. We have cooled wine and fruit if you wish." Oberyn lowered himself onto a cushion. He accepted a goblet of chilled Dornish white wine from a servant, savoring the crisp taste on his tongue. Ellaria settled beside him, kneeling gracefully. Meanwhile, Doran took a measured breath, and for a moment, silence reigned. Oberyn could sense the tension that underlay Doran's calm facade. At last, Doran spoke. "I followed the news from King's Landing closely. You did what many believed impossible, exposed Tywin Lannister before all the realm. Now the man rots in a cell. I hardly dare believe it even now. Not a day has passed these many years that I have not thought of Elia, or cursed the men who took her from us. You and Tyrion Lannister have wrought a turn of the wheel I never expected. You have a share in this triumph as well, brother," Oberyn said quietly. "If you had not been so patient all these years, husbanding Dorne's strength, we would not be in a position to stand firm. And your efforts in distributing that letter to so many lords, ensuring it could not be suppressed, proved invaluable." Doran gave a small nod. "Even so, the realm is precarious. Tywin is caged, but the rest of House Lannister remains. Cersei is not a woman to bow meekly. She has clutched her son, the king, to her side, and many Lannister men in the Westerlands still hold fealty to that name. The Tyrells stand in partial alliance with Tommen, but I sense they are uncertain. Mace Tyrell wants to avoid war, but if he sees advantage, he will press it. Oberyn sipped his wine. Yes, war is always near. Tyrion believes that as soon as the Great Council meets, the question of Tywin's punishment will spark fierce debate. Some will push for execution, others for forced exile, others for a quiet compromise. I, for one, will not abide compromise. He must pay, in full, for Elaya's murder. A shadow of old grief passed over Doran's face at the mention of Elia. I share your sentiment. Her name must be avenged in both fact and memory. But we must tread carefully. If the realm perceives that Dorne's only aim is to see blood spilled, we risk uniting old enemies against us. As it stands, our position is strong enough that we can demand what we wish, yet it must be done with caution. Illyria's voice was soft, but firm. Prince Doran, I have walked among the Lords of King's Landing these past weeks. Many fear further strife. They resent the Lannisters, but they do not wish to see open war in the streets. If we show them that we want justice, not chaos, we may gain allies. Doran nodded. Exactly. With Tywin's imprisonment, many families who once bowed to the Lion now hesitate. Some might tilt toward us if we show ourselves the more moderate power. Oberyn couldn't quite keep the scowl from his face. I'll be as moderate as needed in the short term, so long as it does not threaten Tywin's ultimate fate. His fate will be decided at the Great Council, said Doran. From what I have heard, that gathering will happen in King's Landing. Each great house is invited to send representatives. The North is in disarray, but the Vale might appear through proxies of House Arryn. The Stormlands might send whoever has consolidated power there, though some question how many loyal Baratheon supporters remain, now that Tommen is crowned. As for the Reach, Mace Tyrell will likely come himself or send his favored son. The Riverlands remain battered by war, while the Ironborn harass the coasts. The entire realm is a nest of unsettled conflicts. Oberyn set his goblet down, and in that nest, Tywin's trial or sentencing could easily become the match that lights the tinder. I doubt any of the major houses want to see us drag an old man to the block, not after so many bloody years. But Elaya's ghost will not be laid to rest by half measures. Doran considered him. What of Tyrion Lannister, then? He is presumably still in King's Landing or near it. Has he written to you? A memory of Tyrion's parting words flickered in Oberyn's mind. If you ever need me, send word. The dwarf's face had carried a strange mixture of relief and sorrow, as though toppling Tywin had both liberated him and broken him. We've sent messages back and forth, Oberyn answered. Tyrion intends to remain at the Red Keep or somewhere in the city proper. He knows Cersei despises him, but with Tywin gone, his own prospects have oddly improved. He's the last adult male Lannister with at least some respect from a portion of the court. And though Cersei may try to have him killed, he's well guarded by friendships among the Gold Cloaks and a scattering of lords who find him less odious than her. Illyria gave a slight nod, as though remembering. He is also cunning. He will keep himself alive, and he owes us a debt of gratitude. Without our alliance, he would have lost his head at that trial. I do not doubt he'll send word if anything changes. For a moment, Doran's eyes narrowed, as if weighing the complexities. Then he exhaled. Good. I must craft my next steps carefully. For too long, Dorne has seethed, yet done nothing. If we can see Tywin punished, then perhaps we can put that portion of history to rest and shape a future where Dorne stands as a recognized equal among the kingdoms. We are not simply a vassal to be cowed. We should be courted, not spurned. Oberyn smiled thinly. Well said. I came back to see that future with my own eyes. I do not intend to linger here forever, but I must see justice done at that great council. If the realm tries to shuffle Tywin's guilt away, if half the lords would prefer to keep him breathing for the sake of their own pockets, I will tear the council hall apart. Doran's voice was gentle but firm. You will not, because that would cost us our victory. If the rest of Westeros sees Dorne as violent and uncontrollable, they will rally behind Cersei. We will instead show them that Tywin's crimes are singular, irredeemable, and that we are entirely within our rights to demand retribution. The realm itself will pressure the crown to see it through. Oberyn, forced to temper his pride, dipped his head. As you say, brother, I will follow your wisdom, so long as it does not betray Elaya's memory. It will not. Doran closed his eyes briefly, as though pained by the mention of her name. But for now, rest. Enjoy the warmth of home. We have months yet before that council. I would have you heal fully, so that you do not limp about the dais cursing men you'd be better off outsmarting. Oberyn gave a short bark of laughter, though he understood the seriousness behind Doran's wry words. I'll consider it. The gods know I'm tired, but do not think me content to remain idle. I have daughters, my sand snakes, who no doubt wonder at my health. I intend to see each of them. I suspect they have strong opinions on these recent events. A small, knowing smile touched Doran's lips. Yes, your daughters are spirited. They will be thrilled to see you alive and victorious. Elaria touched Oberyn's shoulder. They have missed you, my love. The conversation turned to lighter matters for a time. The wine harvest in the southern region, the possibility of repairing old roads that had been washed out, and a few trifling matters of local governance. At length, Doran's maester arrived to check on the prince's swollen joints, and Oberyn and Elaria took their leave, promising to meet again soon for a more formal strategy session. They walked through the corridors, hand in hand, neither speaking for a long moment. The hush of Sunspear pressed around them, broken only by the distant music of a fountain splashing in a courtyard. A half-dozen paces behind them, 2 Martell guards trailed, far enough to allow the couple some privacy. Oberyn's chest felt tight with so many emotions. Home again, but everything was different. The old thirst for vengeance had shaped him for so long. Now that he had Tywin in a cell, the horizon felt both exhilarating and uncertain. A flutter of laughter drifted from a covered walkway nearby, and a moment later, one of Oberyn's daughters appeared, stepping into the corridor. Tyene Sand, golden-haired and lovely, dressed in a flowing gown that looked half septa, half temptress. Upon seeing Oberyn, her eyes lit up, and she rushed forward. "Father!" she exclaimed, her voice carrying that musical cadence Oberyn remembered from her childhood. Without hesitation, she flung her arms around him. The force of the embrace made him wince slightly, his ribs still healing, but he laughed through the pain, hugging her back. "Tyene," he said, releasing her to get a better look. "You've grown even more beautiful in my absence. If the realm knew how dangerous your beauty and your mind together could be, they'd lock their doors." Tyene gave a playful pout. "You make me sound like a monster, but I'm only a dutiful daughter." Elaria arched an amused eyebrow. "Dutiful in your own cunning ways." Tyene's smile turned sly. "I have no idea what you mean." Then her expression grew earnest. "When we heard news that you dueled Gregor Clegane, Father, we feared the worst. My sisters and I had each resolved 100 ways we might avenge you if you fell." Oberyn's heart twisted, imagining how that news must have landed on his daughters. "I live, as you see, and I have the mountain's head." Tyene's eyes gleamed. "I heard. I also heard you put Tywin Lannister in chains. Is that true?" "He's in a cell," Oberyn replied. "His final punishment awaits the Great Council. We must prepare to stand firm if the realm shows weakness in sentencing him." Tyene's delicate features hardened with sudden resolve. "Then my sisters and I stand ready. If there's anything we can do to ensure Tywin pays, name it." Elaria put a hand on Tyene's arm. "We'll not charge headlong into more bloodshed unless necessary, dear. Remember, Prince Doran is determined to handle this with cunning, not brute force." Tyene, though she pursed her lips, nodded. "Yes, I know. Obella said as much. They're all at the practice yard, Nymeria, Obara, Sarella, the lot of them. Would you like to see them? They've been restive, waiting to greet you." Oberyn smiled fondly. "Very much. Let on." Tywin guided them through a series of arcaded passageways that opened onto a wide courtyard used for weapon drills. The yard boasted racks of spears, shields, and sabers, along with archery butts lined up near one wall. A half-dozen figures, both men and women, stood in small groups practicing forms or sparring under the vigilant eye of an older arms master. Among them were Oberyn's daughters, the Sand Snakes, each with a distinctive bearing. Obara with her spear and stern visage, Nymeria with her graceful confidence, Sarella with inquisitive eyes. When Tywin hailed them, they turned. At once, a rush of motion. Obara set aside her spear and strode forward with purposeful intensity, while Nymeria walked with measured steps, and Sarella broke into an excited grin. They gathered around Oberyn, each greeting him with her own style. A short bow, a brief embrace, a kiss on the cheek. Their expressions mirrored Tywin's mixture of relief and fierce pride. Oberyn took a moment just to look upon them, feeling the warmth of fatherly love surge in his chest. "You return to us victorious," Obara said, as though it were a foregone conclusion. "I never doubted you would kill that brute, though I heard you were gravely hurt." Her sharp eyes flicked to the faint lines of scarring on his face. "How do you fare?" "I manage," Oberyn said. "The maesters saved me from my own poison." Obara snorted softly at that irony. "Good. Poison is best served to others, not oneself." Nymeria sidled closer, her air more poised but no less intense. "And now Tywin Lannister rots in a cell because of you. The realm has never seen such a blow to that family's pride. Gods, I almost want to dance at the thought." Oberyn cast a glance around, noticing that some soldiers and the armsmaster were discreetly watching. Let them watch, he thought. He wanted no illusions about the Martell's strength. "Yes, he is undone. But the game is not over," he said. "We must be prepared to see it through at the Great Council. There are those who would prefer to see Tywin released or exiled under soft conditions. I will not have that. Dorne will not have that." Sarella's voice carried her usual inquisitive spark. "So you're here to rally Dorne, father? Or do we intend to muster swords and storm kings landing if they deny us justice?" Oberyn hesitated. He could sense each daughter's readiness for action. It was a heady thing to have such loyal children, but also dangerous if not guided well. "We do not want open war unless forced," he finally said. "Prince Doran and I agree. But if they will not deliver the punishment Tywin deserves, we shall ensure they have no choice." The Sand Snakes exchanged a look of understanding. Obara cracked her knuckles, as if ready for that scenario. Tywin and Nymeria nodded. Sarella tapped a finger to her chin, her bright mind likely turning over the intricacies of politics. Oberyn let the swirl of their shared passion wash over him. He was proud of them all. In the hush that followed, Ilaria spoke, addressing all the daughters with a gentle but serious tone. "Your father has risked much. The name of Martell rings through the realm. If the rest of Westeros sees Dorne as fanatical or vengeful, it could undermine all we've done. So do not let your thirst for blood overshadow your father's victory." "Yes." Tywin took a breath. "We understand, Ilaria." Obara shrugged, though Oberyn recognized in her eyes that she did indeed understand. "If the realm attempts to cheat us of justice, we'll respond as needed," she muttered. Oberyn placed a hand on her shoulder, meeting her gaze. "Yes, precisely so. For now, train, stay vigilant, and be ready to move when I ask it. But do not stir up trouble on your own." With that, the tension eased, and the conversation shifted to simpler joys. How the days had passed in Sunspear, the small amusements and rivalries within the court, the visitors from Essos who had arrived by ship, speaking of trade. Oberyn lingered in the courtyard, watching his daughters resume their drills, their spears and daggers flashing in the bright sun. He recalled the words of Tyrion, who once teased him that the Dornish ways both fascinated and terrified the rest of Westeros. Let them be terrified, then, if it meant they treated Dorne with respect. When the day's light began to wane, Oberyn made his way with Ilaria to the private suites Prince Doran had prepared. A warm bath awaited him, He eased into the tiled basin with a grunt of pain that melted into a sigh of pleasure as the heat soaked into his sore muscles. Ellaria joined him, sliding into the water at his side, letting the steam envelope them both. For a time, they let the world slip away, content to rest. But eventually, reality intruded. Illaria's voice was soft, near his ear. "You never told me your thoughts about the possibility that the King's Landing Court might free Tywin in an attempt to buy peace. Do you believe they would truly be so cowardly?" Oberyn's eyes narrowed as he stared at the rippling water. "Perhaps. Or they might try for a lesser punishment. Confinement in Casterly Rock, or demands that House Lannister pay large sums of gold but spare Tywin's life. There are many routes for them to mitigate the damage." She slid a hand over his chest. "Then what will we do if that comes to pass?" He let the question settle. Memories of Elia's face rose unbidden in his mind. "If that comes to pass, I'll push with everything Dorne has to see that we are not ignored. Alliances, threats, the leverage of supplies. Whatever it takes. I'll gather the lords of Dorne, see if the Tyrells might prefer to side with us rather than let Tywin slip free. Even the lords of the Vale might be swayed if we present a strong front. I am not naive enough to think we can stand alone against the entire realm, but if enough great houses see Tywin as a liability, then no one will weep for his downfall." Ellaria leaned her head back against the basin's edge. "Yes, that is the wise course, but be ready for Cersei to strike from another angle. If she cannot free Tywin through diplomacy, she might attempt other methods. Bribery of the king's judges, cunning with the faith, even infiltration into Dorne. She may think to hold hostages or assassinate key figures. Assassination or sowing chaos," Oberyn agreed. "We'll watch for it. You know me, Ellaria. I can greet an assassin's blade with my own. I have no illusions about the danger, but I will not live cowering in the shadows." She smiled gently. "I'd never expect that of you." They let silence settle again, the heat of the bath lulling them. Through the arched window, Oberyn could see a sliver of deepening dusk. The sky took on an orange glow, shading to purple near the horizon. He felt an ache in his ribs, a reminder of how close he'd come to never seeing such sights again. With that ache came a renewed sense of purpose. He had not survived all that to let Tywin Lannister slip away. Nor would he let House Martell's victory unravel. The following days in Sunspear settled into a steady rhythm, a mix of small joys and urgent planning. Oberyn visited the water gardens, letting the spray of fountains wrap him in memories of boyhood. He conversed with courtiers who came seeking his favor, some carrying gifts or flattery, others pressing for Dorne's stance on trade agreements. The Martell seat had always maintained unique laws regarding commerce, especially with Essos. Now, with the realm uncertain, many foreign merchants saw an opportunity to strike deals. Oberyn entertained them as politely as he could, but his mind remained fixated on the trial that loomed half a year away. Often, he joined Doran in the solar or in a shaded pavilion, discussing the communications they received from other regions. Ravens arrived with pleas, with threats disguised as requests, with half-baked attempts at forging alliances. One letter from Kevin Lannister, Tywin's loyal brother, tried to argue that Tywin should be treated with leniency in light of his many years of service to the realm. Doran read it aloud, glancing at Oberyn to gauge his reaction. Oberyn only laughed harshly. Kevin Lannister might be an honorable man in some respects, but that changed nothing of the monstrous act that Tywin had ordered. In that same batch of ravens came a letter from Tyrion. Oberyn took it to his chambers and read it in private. The imp's handwriting, small and neat, filled the page. "Prince Oberyn, I hope the southern sun warms you better than this uneasy city. Things here are shifting daily. Cersei has begun to surround young King Tommen with sycophants who whisper that releasing Tywin might preserve the unity of the realm. Yet Margaery Tyrell's kin push back, reminding Tommen of the crown's duty to uphold justice. The Gold Cloaks remain divided in loyalty. Some recall that Tywin once paid their salaries. Others have no love for the man. Meanwhile, Grand Maester Pycelle dithers on about mercy. As for me, I remain unpoisoned thus far. A small miracle. I expect a dagger in my back at any moment. but I have grown adept at glancing over my shoulder. Perhaps I should request a party of Dornish guards with the reflexes of snakes. Kidding aside, I trust you know that if you intend to secure Tywin's condemnation, you should return to King's Landing well before the Great Council. Cersei will do her best to shape the narrative, to coddle the judges and weigh the scales. Lastly, I have discovered something of interest. A rumor that Qyburn, that disgraced maester who dabbles in dark arts, has been visiting Tywin in his cell. What business they have, I cannot guess, but it cannot be wholesome. I will attempt to learn more. Until then, keep your eyes sharp, my prince. Yours in mischief and occasional righteousness, Tyrion Lannister. Oberyn folded the parchment slowly, absorbing Tyrion's words. The mention of Qyburn pricked at his memory. Qyburn was known for vile experiments that cost him his chain. That alone was cause for alarm. If Cersei allowed him access to Tywin, what might they be plotting? Was it some medical attempt to keep Tywin alive, or a deeper scheme to engineer his escape? The possibilities churned in Oberyn's mind. He wrote a reply immediately, urging Tyrion to keep him informed of Qyburn's movements and to stay on guard. After sealing it, he sought out Doran. His brother, seated in a cushioned chair beneath a carved colonnade, listened intently as Oberyn relayed the contents of Tyrion's letter. Doran's brow creased. Cersei is cunning, but often rash. Qyburn's involvement is troubling. He has a taste for monstrous acts. I would not underestimate him. If they find some means to smuggle Tywin out of his cell, or to engineer a show of so-called innocence, they could shape public perception before the Great Council even begins. Oberyn nodded. I think I should return sooner than planned. In a few months, not 6. Linger there, watch for these developments, and ensure Tywin remains behind bars. Illyria, who stood by a nearby pillar, frowned. You've only just come home. A pang of regret rippled through Oberyn. Yes, and I hate to leave so soon, but if we wait until just before the council, we risk letting Cersei tighten her grip. The best vantage is from within the city, close enough to keep watch. I can also leverage the alliances we hope to form. Speak directly with the Tyrells, the Vale envoys, whomever is present. Doran tapped his fingers on the arm of the chair, thinking. I can dispatch a retinue with you, men loyal to House Martell, to serve as your guard and your voice. If the capital sees a significant Dornish presence, they will understand we are not to be dismissed. Meanwhile, I will stay here, continuing to manage the flow of letters and resources. When the time draws near for the Great Council, perhaps I will send one of our nieces or nephews in my stead, as I fear my health won't permit the journey. Oberyn placed a hand on Doran's. So be it, brother. I will depart in 2 months' time, maybe 3, giving us enough time to organize. That should be soon enough to disrupt any quiet conspiracies. In the meantime, I can finish healing and ensure that Dorne's stance is clear to all who visit. And so it was decided. Oberyn felt both relief and a small ache of disappointment, for he had hoped to spend half a year in peace beneath the Dornish sun. But the realm's tensions were not to be taken lightly. Tywin might be physically contained, yet the Lannister influence in the crown was a many-headed hydra. The next weeks in Sunspear allowed Oberyn a measure of respite, however. He reconnected with each of his daughters, took time to practice with a spear and whip, testing his limits as his injuries mended. Though his movements remained stiffer than before, he felt certain that, if forced into battle, he could still hold his own. At times, the old frustration flared. He missed the effortless grace with which he used to fight. But then he would remind himself that at least he had a second chance, and that Illyria's loving presence was more valuable than any lost flourish of skill. The presence of his daughters enlivened the palace. Sarella pored over old manuscripts, especially those detailing King's Landing politics, urging Oberyn to let her accompany him back to the capital. Obara spent half her days drilling with the guard, half her nights drinking with them, repeatedly telling them the story of how Oberyn toppled the mountain. Tywin, for her part, quietly honed her skill with poisons. Oberyn once found her in the gardens picking specific blossoms to press for toxins, her calm expression belying the lethal knowledge she possessed. Nymeria took charge of some small administrative tasks in the palace, showing a knack for forging alliances among lesser courtiers. Ilaria fit seamlessly among them all, coaxing them to share their energies in constructive ways rather than bickering or competing, as siblings sometimes did. Occasionally, Oberyn would pause to consider the broader tapestry of the realm. Ravens brought news of the north. Stannis Baratheon was rumored to be warring against the Boltons, though details were hazy. The Iron Islands still harried the western coasts, though with Tywin's downfall, the Westerlands seemed less organized to repel them. The Vale remained quiet, shielded by the Mountains of the Moon, governed by a regency council for the boy Lord Robert Arryn. The Tyrells consolidated their hold on King Tommen by continuing to sponsor lavish feasts and improvements in King's Landing. Marjorie Tyrell was, by all accounts, adored by the small folk. And overshadowing all was the question: what would become of Tywin? He was a single man, now dethroned, but his name still carried enough weight to reshape alliances. Oberyn knew that the second the realm sensed House Lannister could rise again, some would flock to that banner. He had to ensure that time never came. At last, nearly 3 months after returning to Dorne, Oberyn saw that the final pieces were ready for his departure. A suitable retinue had been assembled: 50 skilled spearmen, half a dozen knights from minor Dornish houses who pledged loyalty to Prince Doran, a handful of attendants to handle correspondence and finances, and a pair of maesters for medical or diplomatic needs. Some of Oberyn's daughters clamored to join, but he insisted that only 1 or 2 might come, lest it look like a Martell invasion. In the end, Nymeria Sand was chosen, for her calm and poised approach, a valuable trait in King's Landing's snake pit. Obara spat in frustration at being denied, but Oberyn reasoned that her fiery nature might lead to reckless challenges. Tyene decided she would remain as well, though she teased him that if a single hair on his head were harmed, she would kill half the city. One evening, as the final trunks were packed and the retinue prepared for an early departure, Oberyn stood on a balcony overlooking Sunspear's harbor. Lights flickered along the coast, and beyond lay the open sea, dark and full of possibilities. Ilaria joined him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You are certain of this course?" she asked. "Another long journey, back to that place of whispers. I won't stop you, but I worry. You still bear scars." He placed an arm around her waist, drawing her close. "I'm certain, my love. If Tywin were to be quietly smuggled out, or if the court were to be swayed by bribes, everything we fought for could be lost. Elia deserves more than a half-finished retribution. The realm deserves to see that even the highest lords cannot butcher children with impunity." Ilaria nodded. "Then let us be on our way. I will ride with you to King's Landing again, if that is your wish." He paused, considering. "Doran wants you to stay here, you know, to advise him and handle certain negotiations with visiting envoys. There's talk of forging new trade pacts with the free cities Volantis, Lys. You've a gift for persuasion and warmth." She gave him a faint smile. "Would you rather I remain, or would you have me by your side?" Oberyn's heart tugged in 2 directions. He dearly wanted Ilaria with him. She was his rock, and her presence had steadied him many a time. Yet he also saw the sense in letting her remain in Dorne, helping Doran. If something went awry in King's Landing, at least she would be safe here, and they would not risk losing both of them if Cersei unleashed her vengeance. "I think you should remain," he said at last, though it pained him to say it. "We must not leave Doran to manage all on his own. The threat of war is real. If lines of diplomacy fail, we need someone with skill to handle them. I can manage the intrigues in King's Landing. And if I need you, I will send word as swiftly as I can." Ilaria lifted her head, her dark eyes searching his face. "If that is your decision, I'll accept it, though I hate to be parted from you." Oberyn brushed a tender kiss to her forehead. "When I return victorious, we will celebrate in the Water Gardens, or on the beaches of the Broken Arm if you prefer. The world will look different once Tywin is consigned to whatever dreadful end awaits him." A sigh left her lips. "Be careful, Oberyn. This time, do not let any savage giant of a night catch you unawares." He chuckled softly. "I'll keep my eyes open, I promise." They remained on the balcony for a time, arm in arm, letting the hush of the sea calm their thoughts. Oberyn tried to memorize every detail of this moment. The warm pressure of Valeria by his side, the salt tang in the air, the way the lights of Sunspear formed a soft glow below them. He would carry these sensations north, into that den of cunning and rivalry. Let it remind him of what he fought for, not just vengeance for Elia, but a future where Dorne could stand proud and free from the shadow of Lannister power. The next morning, Oberyn rose before dawn. He dressed in light riding leathers dyed a rich burgundy, with the Martell sun and spear worked subtly into the stitching. He fastened a cloak about his shoulders, and a fine rapier rode at his hip. Though a spear had always been his weapon of choice, the rapier felt more comfortable for everyday wear in the capital's corridors. He might keep a spear for the battlefield if need arose. Nymeria Sand was already waiting in the courtyard, flanked by the retinue. She wore traveling leathers and carried a slender sword at her belt. Her curled brown hair was pulled back in a neat tail, and her expression matched Oberyn's, poised, resolute. Her eyes flashed with excitement behind her calm facade. She had always craved involvement in greater affairs, and now she was about to step squarely onto the realm's grand stage. They exchanged a wordless nod. Doran was helped into the courtyard by an attendant, each step careful due to his gout. Oberyn went to him, clasping his hand in parting. "Brother," Doran said, his tone grave, "remember everything we discussed. No matter what cunning twist Cersei or her allies attempt, do not let your wrath overshadow your reason. I rely on you to keep Dorne's cause just in the eyes of the realm. Let them see you as a man wronged, yes, but also as a prince with dignity. Let them see that we only demand what is fair." Oberyn inclined his head. "I will do my best, and if the time for courtesy passes, then we will be ready," Doran finished, giving a small, wry smile. "Go. May the sun guide you." Valeria approached, allowing one final embrace. She whispered in his ear, "Return to me, Oberyn. You have too much left to give this world to let it slip away." He kissed her cheek. "I will. Keep watch over Doran, and keep watch over yourself." With that, he mounted his horse. The men of the retinue formed up around him and Nymeria, the Dornish banners snapping in a light breeze. A small crowd of onlookers, servants and lesser courtiers, had gathered to see them off. The gates swung open, and Oberyn felt the familiar anticipation of a journey. This time, though, he would be returning to King's Landing not as a supplicant for justice, but as the man who had placed Tywin Lannister in chains. Let the city whisper about the Red Viper's second arrival. He would show them that his fight had never truly ended. Their column rode out through Sunspear streets, past the markets and the docks, and then curved inland to pick up the roads that would eventually lead them back north. The day was bright, the sky an unbroken blue. Oberyn inhaled deeply, tasting the dryness of the wind. With each clop of the horses' hooves, they drew closer to the uncertain swirl of the capital. Nymeria guided her horse beside Oberyn's. "Father, do you expect we'll face immediate hostility on the road?" "We shouldn't," he replied. "We have enough men to discourage bandits, and no house wants to start a war by attacking us outright. The real battles will be fought with words once we reach the city." She nodded, glancing at the horizon. "I look forward to it. My spear is ready if they prefer less subtle contests." Oberyn smirked. "Subtlety first, blood second. That's the rule, or so your uncle Doran would say." Nymeria gave a mischievous tilt of her head. "We'll see how well subtlety fares against the vipers in the crown's court." They traveled for days, the land changing from the rocky passes of Dorne into greener fields. The journey was largely uneventful, though occasional travelers gawked at the sight of Dornish spearmen in full array. They encountered a few merchants heading south, who spoke of tensions in the Crownlands. The rumor was that Cersei had been working to gather allies from the Westerlands, bringing smaller lords eastward to stand in King's Landing. Some said these lords wore their swords openly in the streets, as if daring a confrontation. The city was bracing for the Great Council, though it was still months away. As always, the capital churned with rumor after rumor. On one crisp morning, Oberyn spotted the Blackwater rush glittering in the distance. The old sense of foreboding crept into him. The last time he'd glimpsed those waters, he had been heading to King's Landing to serve on the small council and ultimately duel the mountain. But the city beckoned again. They rode onward until the Red Keep's ramparts appeared on the horizon, perched above the sprawling masses of King's Landing. Smoke rose from thousands of chimneys, forming a haze over the rooftops. The midday sun caught the gilded roofs of the Great September and turned them into blazing beacons. As they approached the gates, the sight of Dornish banners caused a stir among the guards. A captain emerged, looking wary, but he recognized Oberyn Martell from his previous sojourn in the city. The gates opened with minimal fuss, though the captain's polite words could not hide his apprehension. He likely had orders from Cersei to watch for suspicious movements. The caravan wound through the muddy streets, thronged with small folk who paused to stare. Some cheered softly, others muttered under their breath. The wagon wheels clattered, the horses snorted. Oberyn felt the city's smells: horse dung, sweat, fish from the wharves, assaulting him anew. King's Landing was as unkempt as ever, but it was also the seat of power, the place where the realm's fate was often decided. He spurred his mount forward. They ascended the hill toward the Red Keep. At the drawbridge, a detail of gold cloaks came forth. Their commander cleared his throat, asking Oberyn to state his business. Oberyn raised an eyebrow. "I am Prince Oberyn Martell. I have returned to see to the matter of Lord Tywin Lannister's confinement and to arrange for the upcoming Great Council. Unless the king has forbidden the approach of princes, you will stand aside." The commander hesitated only a moment before bowing stiffly and gesturing that they might enter. The castle yard bustled with activity. Lannister men, Tyrell men, Crown men, all in various corners, forming small pockets of tense alliance. Oberyn recognized sigils from the Westerlands and a handful from the Reach. He dismounted, allowing a stable boy to take his horse, and motioned for Nymeria and the retinue to do likewise. The heavy doors leading into the Red Keep loomed ahead. Within those halls, Cersei would be playing her games, Tommen would be obeying or defying in his innocent way, Margaery Tyrell might be weaving her own influence, and Tyrion would be somewhere, hopefully with the latest information. Oberyn squared his shoulders, ignoring the dull ache in his side that always returned after a long day's ride. He had come to see the final stroke of justice delivered. He made his way into the main hall, the echo of footsteps on stone. Courtiers paused to watch him pass. Some parted respectfully, others whispered behind raised hands. A hush fell like a ripple through the crowd as they recognized the Red Viper of Dorne, the man who had shattered Tywin's power. At the far end of the hall, near the doors that led to the throne room, he saw a small knot of Lannister guards, distinctive in their crimson cloaks. They watched him warily. One man stepped forward, Ser Lancel Lannister, if Oberyn recalled correctly, a cousin of Cersei's. The young man's face was pale, as if pious or perpetually anxious. "Prince Oberyn," Lancel said, voice trembling with forced politeness. "We were not informed of your arrival. Is the king expecting you?" Oberyn eyed him. "He may not be, but that is hardly my concern. I am here on official business of House Martell and the forthcoming council." "Where is Tyrion Lannister?" Lancel grimaced. "Lord Tyrion, he is about, possibly in his chambers or the royal library. Shall I fetch him?" Before Oberyn could answer, a familiar voice echoed from behind. "No need, dear cousin. I can fetch myself." Tyrion Lannister emerged from a side corridor, leaning on a walking stick that Oberyn had not seen him use before. He seemed slightly thinner, the lines around his eyes deeper, yet that wry half-smile still played on his lips. "Prince Oberyn, I had half expected your return, but not so soon." Oberyn inclined his head. "I trust you are well, Tyrion. Your letter spoke of suspicious visits to Tywin's cell." Tyrion's smile slipped. "Yes, Qyburn, among other concerns. My dear sister has been quite busy. Come, best not to discuss it here in the open. I can arrange rooms for you and your retinue." He flicked a glance at Lancel, whose expression suggested he was none too pleased about this conversation continuing. "Cousin, Do scurry along and inform Cersei that Prince Oberyn is here. We wouldn't want her to claim we kept secrets." Lancel gave a curt bow, then retreated, gathering his men as he went. Tyrion watched them go with a sardonic tilt of his brow. Then he turned back to Oberyn. "Shall we? Your retinue can follow, or they may wait in the courtyard. I suspect some of them might prefer fresh air to these stuffy corridors." "Lead on," Oberyn said. He signaled Nymeria to accompany him, letting the other Dornish men and women remain close behind. They walked deeper into the Red Keep, up winding staircases and along passages that reeked of incense and old dust. Along the way, Tyrion made polite small talk, asking about Oberyn's journey and how the southern roads fared. But Oberyn could sense tension in the dwarf's voice, as if he had far more urgent words to share in private. At last, Tyrion brought them to a modest suite of chambers not far from where Oberyn had once stayed. The rooms were decently furnished, though with fewer luxuries than might be expected for a prince. Perhaps Cersei had decided to snub him. Oberyn did not care. He only needed a place to rest and a vantage point from which to watch the court. Once inside, Tyrion closed the door and gestured for Nymeria and a couple of guards to wait in the outer antechamber. Then he and Oberyn moved into the inner room. Tyrion exhaled, setting his walking stick aside and rubbing his temple. "So, you return earlier than the Great Council. Good. We may need you to ensure Father stays locked up." Cersei's grip on Tommen grows by the day. She's convinced the boy that if Tywin is freed, it might end the animosity with the Westerlands once and for all. The Tyrells are resisting, but I worry it's only a matter of time before a compromise is brokered. One that leaves Father free. Oberyn's eyes narrowed. "We cannot allow that." "Indeed not. Add to that Qyburn's visits, which trouble me deeply. He claims to be treating Father's worsening condition, possibly Father's heart or an infection. I do not trust it. Qyburn has methods." Tyrion shook his head. "I tried to glean more, but Father refused to speak with me. He sees me as the cause of all his downfall. In a way, he's right." Oberyn gave a grim smile. "We both are. But if Qyburn is meddling, perhaps we can question the jailers, or bribe them to find out the nature of these visits." Tyrion lifted his eyebrows. "That might work. The trouble is that many of the jailers have changed. Cersei replaced them with men from the Westerlands. I suspect they're loyal to her. We'll need subtlety to find cracks in their loyalty." Oberyn let a breath hiss out. "Then subtlety it will be. I came prepared to stay for months if need be. I have the men, the gold, and the will. If we must fight cunning with cunning, so be it. Tywin will not slip away from me. Not this time." Tyrion regarded him quietly, then nodded. "Welcome back to King's Landing, Prince Oberyn. The vipers in these walls have hardly lessened in number, but perhaps they'll think twice now that the Red Viper has returned." Oberyn's lips curved in a cold smile. "Let them think thrice. Tywin's time is near an end, one way or another." He gazed out the window at the city below, recalling how once he'd arrived with Ilaria by his side, how the bells had rung for Joffrey's wedding, how naive that moment seemed now. This time, the city was no less dangerous, but the tides had shifted. Tywin was in chains, but still a cunning beast. And Oberyn stood as the man who had bested him, come to finish what had begun all those years ago, when Elia Martell's screams echoed through the halls of the royal palace. He laid a hand on the hilt of his rapier, inhaled the heavy air of King's Landing, and steeled himself. One final push for justice, and the fate of the realm might hinge on the outcome. He was ready.